Number 10. Liopleurodon. One of the most terrifying monsters from the Jurassic period was the Liopleurodon. But exactly how terrifying this monster really was is under debate. Its size has been greatly exaggerated and greatly contested between experts. The dinosaur was first featured in a BBC programme titled Walking with Dinosaurs, which first aired back in 1999. In the programme, it was grossly exaggerated as being over 80 feet long. While some scientists do concede that it could be upwards of 50 feet, a more accurate representation would place this sea beast at being around 30 feet. The Liopleurodon was a type of marine reptile known as a pliosaur. It would have had a very short neck, an elongated head, and super long flippers. Basically, it looked kind of like a torpedo with flippers. There were many different types of pliosaurs in the Jurassic period, and they were distributed all over the world just like modern sharks. And yes, the Liopleurodon was an apex predator. Part of this was because it was a super fast swimmer, again like modern sharks. Imagine a shark mixed with a lizard and a T-Rex. This was kind of what a Liopleurodon looked like. Number 9. Basilosaurus. The first thing you need to know about the Basilosaurus is that it was not properly named. When this ancient creature was first discovered, the researchers believed it was a marine reptile, and so they named it Basilosaurus, which translates to king lizard. However, after further review, it turned out that the undersea monster was actually a mammalian. There was a proposed name change. Researchers wanted to name it Zeuglodon, which would translate to yolk teeth. However, because the name was already registered, it could not be changed. In any case, you probably want to hear about how ferocious this beast really was. The average size of the Basilosaurus was about 60 feet in length. That's a lot bigger than any modern day shark. It was one of the earliest whales that ever swam in the ocean, even though it was descended from terrestrial mammals. This is one of the only ancient animals that gives us a direct glimpse into the way it evolved. Its front flippers still had elbow joints at the time of its extinction. This is something that is only glimpsed today in seals. This means its flippers would have at one point been legs. Just like fish can evolve out of the sea, land animals can evolve into the ocean. It's believed that this dinosaur primarily ate smaller whales and big fish. Because of its massive size, it wasn't often eaten as prey. There wasn't much that could challenge it. Number 8. The Sea Scorpion. This one should probably be number 1 on the list. I can't think of anything more terrifying than a sea scorpion the size of an adult human. That's right, somewhere around 460 million years ago, there was a giant sea scorpion swimming around in the waters that covered present-day Iowa. According to Life Science, the giant scorpions likely fed on squishy eel-like creatures. They weren't really scorpions, but they sure looked like it. The prehistoric sea scorpions were more closely related to modern spiders and horseshoe crabs, but that doesn't make them any less unnerving. Just imagine something half lobster, quarter spider and quarter crab grabbing you by the legs while you're trying to go for a swim. The approximate size of the sea scorpions was somewhere around 5.6 feet long. If nothing else, it was definitely a strange animal. It had special rear legs that worked as paddles, and it had a second and third pair of limbs which were used for grabbing prey. Then, it also had 3 additional pairs of limbs in the back which were used for scrambling across the ocean floor. Basically, it could swim using paddles, run using legs, and pinch you with its long front arms. The sea scorpion fossils were discovered at the bottom of a meteorite crater, a massive scar on the planet that would have formed about 470 million years ago during a meteor event. There were over 150 fossil fragments discovered at this site, including the man-sized sea scorpions. And now for number 7. But first, remember to let me know which creature you think is the scariest in the comments below, and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on more videos like these. Number 7. Mauisaurus. The Mauisaurus is a type of plesiosaur that lived around 77 million years ago in the late Cretaceous period. Its main home would have been around what is now New Zealand. In its day, it was the largest plesiosaur in the world and perhaps the biggest marine reptile in the waters around New Zealand. There have been lots of specimens uncovered, and one thing the Mauisaurus is well known for is its incredibly long neck. It's like an underwater giraffe. It was about 26 feet long, had a slender body, and was able to move smoothly through the water using its 2 sets of giant flippers. Researchers also believe the Mauisaurus, which was a hungry carnivore with sharp teeth for ripping apart fish and squid, could have probably ventured onto the shore for brief amounts of time. All the remains of the Mauisaurus have been found near the South Island of New Zealand, near the city of Canterbury. If you need proof of how vicious this prehistoric sea monster was, look no further than the Mauisaurus fossil that was found in the middle of a battle with a mosasaur, another terrifying predator from the Cretaceous period. The name Mauisaurus comes from the Maori demigod Mau, who according to the legend pulled New Zealand out of the water by using a giant fishing hook. Number 6. Kronosaurus. The Kronosaurus was another plesiosaur from the Cretaceous period, just like the Mauisaurus, except the Kronosaurus was bigger, meaner, and far more terrifying. It lived in the same waters as the Mauisaurus, but a few million years earlier. It grew to be about 40 feet in length, with a skull alone that was over 12 feet long. Imagine a creature with a skull over twice your own height. It could literally open its mouth and swallow you whole. It lived from about 250 million years ago to 80 million years ago, and by the end of its reign had spread throughout quite a bit of the ocean. How did this ferocious marine reptile get its name? It comes from the Greek titan Kronos, so Kronosaurus. It was discovered in 1899, but was not fully understood until just recently. It wasn't until an almost complete Kronosaurus skeleton was discovered in Colombia that experts really began piecing together the puzzle of this extraordinary animal's life. The Kronosaurus had a primary diet of turtles and other plesiosaurs. Because of its ridiculously large size, it was kind of the boss of the ocean in its day. There is some evidence that suggests giant squids could have lived in the same area as Kronosaurus, and it could have eaten them as snacks, but there is no direct evidence. Still, it's pretty impressive if the Kronosaurus could have taken down giant squids. Number 5. Dunkleosteus. It's time to meet the giant armoured placoderm, known as the Dunkleosteus. The name means dunkless bone, which is a mix of the paleontologist's name who described the fossils, David Dunkel, and the Greek word for bone. This prehistoric monster may not be as large or ferocious as the Megalodon, but it's definitely just as terrifying. It lived in the late Devonian period, around 382 million years ago, and was distributed largely throughout North America, Europe, and Morocco. The most famous specimens came from northern Ohio. What makes the Dunkleosteus so terrifying? It's all in the jaws. The Dunkleosteus was completely toothless, but it had armoured jaw plates that were even better than teeth. It was like having extremely sharp gums, like two perfectly formed chopping blades. In fact, it's kind of like the Dunkleosteus had a bear trap for jaws. The bottom jaw had a slicing edge and a cusp at the front that looks like a kind of fang, but there were no actual teeth. With such an incredible jaw structure, it's no surprise that Dunkleosteus was able to bite with around 21,000 pounds of force per square inch. This means it could chomp through bone and meat like nobody's business. It had roughly the same biting force as the giant crocodile, but that's not the only thing that made this carnivore so terrifying. It was also huge. The Dunkleosteus was the largest fish in the Devonian period at around 26 feet in length. It also wore armour. Not only were its jaws formed from armour plating, but it had a similar armour material around its skull, making it kind of like a battering ram. Number 4. The Real Leviathan. In the oceans of today, killer whales work in teams to take down other whales and prey much larger than themselves. But 12 million years ago, there was a much larger predator feasting on the different whales of the ocean. It was a very real Leviathan, properly named Leviathan melvillei. Its name came from the biblical sea monster, the Leviathan, and the author of Moby Dick. It was a massive sperm whale that was only recently discovered near Peru. And while it was around the same size as a modern sperm whale, growing to be about 65 feet in length, it was actually much more dangerous. The sperm whale of today has no functioning teeth in its upper jaws, with only some smaller teeth in its lower jaws which it primarily uses for fighting. A typical sperm whale feeds using suction, relying on a giant rush of water to sweep fish directly into its mouth. However, the prehistoric Leviathan had a mouth full of razor-sharp teeth, with some of them being up to 1 foot in length. Rather than suck in its food, the Leviathan would use its enormous teeth to bite and tear, just like modern killer whales do, only it had a skull 3 times bigger than a killer whale. The Leviathan was definitely at the top of the food chain. Modern sperm whales tend to eat only squid, but researchers believe the Leviathan used its massive teeth to chomp down on its own kind, eating any whale it could find. Interestingly enough, this giant whale lived at the same time as the mighty Megalodon. 12 million years ago, these two ferocious beasts would have been competing to see who could eat more medium-sized whales. Number 3. Elasmosaurus. The Elasmosaurus was one of the biggest plesiosaurs that ever lived. We have a few different plesiosaurs on the list today, and the Elasmosaurus lands right at the top in terms of size. This massive creature was like a brontosaurus underwater. It grew to be around 50 feet in length and had an incredibly long neck, just like a brontosaurus. Like other plesiosaurs, this marine reptile originated in the late Triassic period and kept on all the way until the big extinction. It could weigh upwards of 50 tons. The very first Elasmosaurus fossil was discovered just after the Civil War by a military doctor in Kansas. If you're wondering how such an enormous sea creature could have ended up in Kansas, which doesn't have a drop of water anywhere near it, keep in mind that millions of years ago the American West was completely covered with water all the way until the late Cretaceous period. What's really incredible about the Elasmosaurus is its very long neck, which contained 71 vertebrae. That's about 11 more than any other plesiosaur discovered. In terms of actual ferocity, you have to imagine that anything 50 feet in length swimming through the ocean with a ridiculously long neck and a mouthful of sharp teeth is going to be pretty scary. In fact, this is kind of like the original Loch Ness Monster. It looks exactly like any artist's rendering of the Loch Ness Monster, especially with its enormous neck sticking out of the water. It makes you wonder if there isn't somehow a prehistoric Elasmosaurus floating around in Scotland somewhere. Number 2. Titanoboa. We have some pretty frightening snakes on Earth today. However, in the tropical lowlands of northern Colombia, about 60 miles away from the Caribbean coast, the remains of a prehistoric monster snake have been found. It's been called Titanoboa, and researchers believe it would have been around 40 feet in length. The area in which this fossil was found was once a swampy jungle full of incredible animals like giant turtles, massive crocodiles, and lungfish 3 times the size of their modern Amazonian cousins. This ancient swamp would have been ruled by the giant Titanoboa serpent. It would have looked something like your typical boa constrictor, only it was way bigger and way thicker. Anacondas and boas can grow to be pretty long, but they aren't that thick. The Titanoboa was about as thick as a human person. Just imagine that for a second. A snake that has a body larger than you that could stretch along 2 city blocks and slither through the slime and shallows of the swamp? That is not a jungle I would ever want to venture inside of. According to the Smithsonian, Titanoboa was the largest snake to have ever lived on the planet. Number 1. Spinosaurus. If you ask anyone about the most terrifying sea monsters ever, they talk about plesiosaurs, the megalodon, and Kronosaurus. But nobody ever talks about the largest carnivorous dinosaur that's ever lived. No, it's not a fish or marine reptile, it's the terrifying Spinosaurus, bigger than the Tyrannosaurus and the Gigantosaurus. And although it didn't dive down to the bottom of the ocean or use flippers to propel itself in the water, it actually could swim. Keep in mind that most dinosaurs, just like the Spinosaurus, were basically giant lizards. In fact, Spinosaurus basically means spine lizard. According to a report by Live Science, new fossil evidence is pointing to the fact that Spinosaurus may have been the first dinosaur to swim and hunt in the water. Researchers are going as far as to say that the most fearsome creature to have ever walked the earth spent most of its life in the water. This belief is based on the fact that Spinosaurus had short hind limbs kind of like early whales and other animals that spent significant time in the water. It had dense and compact bones just like penguins, and it had wide and flat feet that it could have used for paddling. Then there is its long and slender jaw, which would have been perfect for catching fish. So, the next time you look at a T-Rex or a Spinosaurus, remember these giant lizards could swim and weren't afraid of slithering into the ocean to hunt for food. Which prehistoric beast would win in a fight against the megalodon? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Number 10. Goonch catfish. There are a lot of pretty creepy fish crawling around in the lakes, rivers and oceans of our world, and one notoriously creepy fish is the Goonch catfish. This thing is an ugly monster that can get up to 6.6 feet long and weigh up to 400 pounds. And an enormous one was recently caught in the Ramganga River in northern India. This particular creepy Goonch catfish is unique for its size, as a local news report claims it could have been the biggest catfish ever found inside a Himalayan river. But it never got to be weighed, as the villagers who caught this slippery catfish were too hungry and ate it before any kind of certification could be done. Or maybe they were just scared of it. This massive Goonch catfish looks more like a shark or a whale than a fish. It's absolutely enormous. The villagers had to carry it back home tied to a massive pole. It took 2 men to carry it between them. The Goonch catfish is pretty terrifying and appeared on an episode of River Monsters called Killer Catfish, Season 1, Episode 2. In this episode, Jeremy Wade investigated a series of freshwater attacks on people in the Kali River. Everyone thought this thing was to blame. It is rumoured to have developed a taste for human flesh after feeding on corpses thrown into the river after funeral ceremonies. However, it doesn't seem likely that this fish would make people disappear. I certainly wouldn't mess with this monster, but it probably made for one impressive fish fry. Let me know if you think this fish is dangerous in the comments below. Number 9. Siamese Carp. A British man in Thailand recently caught the world's biggest and creepiest carp after an incredible 80-minute battle to get the fish from the water and into his arms. Just imagine wrestling with a fishing line for a full 80 minutes. It's one intense workout, especially dealing with Siamese carp, which are absolutely huge. Not to mention they are super creepy with their weird scales, stubby fins and bug eyes. This particular catch, however, is something of a miracle. As the biggest carp ever caught, it weighed an astounding 232 pounds. That's 105 kilograms. The carp was so heavy that they had to use special scales on a stainless steel tripod just to get a proper measurement. The man who caught the fish couldn't even hold it by himself. It took the help of 2 other people just to raise the carp out of the water to get a photograph. Siamese carp are the biggest species in the entire world, and they are found naturally in all kinds of river basins around Asia. And as the name implies, the Siamese carp is extremely common in Thailand. Just imagine finding this chunky fellow in your swimming pool. He looks big enough to take down a human, and if he had managed to drag the fisherman into the water, there's no doubt who would have won that struggle. Number 8. Two-mouthed trout. Of course, everyone wants to see the most bizarre mutant fish. The fish we're talking about now is a two-mouthed trout caught in New York. But it's not the only one of its kind. There have been several reports in recent years of mutant trout being caught with 2 jaws instead of 1. This newest incident, as reported by The Independent, was as recent as 2019. And yes, there are lots of theories swirling around about this bizarre fish. It was hooked out on Lake Champlain in Plattsburgh, New York, and the photos of the fish show that it has a normal mouth, but then a secondary jaw underneath that doesn't appear to be fully formed. But it definitely has 2 mouths. The woman who caught the fish believes that the secondary mouth could have been caused by an injury, very likely from another fisherman. However, there are lots of other interesting theories. Some people say it could have been a mutation, it could have been a birth defect, or it could have been caused by pollution. Other people believe it could have something to do with the sea monster that is believed to live in Lake Champlain, although the fish only weighed about 6 pounds, or 3 kilograms, so it's not much of a sea monster. According to an expert doctor and fish researcher at London's Natural History Museum, this trout is actually pretty normal. Apparently, all fish have a set of gill arches behind their jaws. The doctor believes that this fish either suffered from a birth defect or an injury that caused the skin and muscle that would normally cover that portion of his body to be lost, and therefore the skeletal structure was exposed and it looked just like a second mouth. I prefer to think of it as a radioactive mutant. Maybe another one will be discovered with extra fins or even claws. Yikes! What do you think about these mutant fish? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already so you don't miss on the next videos. Number 7. Fish with lips. If you've ever been interested in kissing a fish on a dare, this is going to be some good news for you. A recent catch out of Malaysia shows a bizarre fish with lips that are weirdly human. And yes, it even has teeth that look extremely human. In fact, everything about the mouth of this fish is human. It could kiss you and bite you at the same time. If that's not the creepiest thing you've ever seen on a fish, well, I don't know what fish you're looking at. And while a lot of people were claiming the photo to be edited after it rose online in 2020, it is 100% real. This type of fish is actually known as a triggerfish, and there are about 40 different kinds of them according to National Geographic. The biggest fish is the stone triggerfish, and it can grow to be around 3.5 feet or 1 meter long. They are typically found in the eastern Pacific and live at the bottom of the ocean, sucking out crabs and worms from the bottom of the sea with their weird lips. The fish's weird teeth are actually used to bite apart sea urchins and eat them. The specific fish in this photo is most likely a black patch triggerfish, and it's a pretty well-known species around the Great Barrier Reef, which does include Malaysia, the area the fish was caught. I still wouldn't get near that face, too creepy. Number 6. Human-faced fish. Another very human-like fish was caught creeping out tourists in a Chinese lake last year. The video of the human-faced fish made it online in 2019, and it was apparently taken by a visitor outside of the city of Kunming in southern China. The video clearly shows a creature with a fish's body and the face of a person. There is literally no other way you can possibly interpret the fish. It looks like a bald man's frowning face, like something terrifying out of a horror movie. The woman who actually films the video of the fish can be heard screaming in the background that the fish turned into a fairy. Of course, fairies don't exist, and there is definitely not a fish with a human face. It's really just a weird looking carp with bizarre features that makes it look a lot like a human-faced fish. According to The Sun, it's not the only one of its kind. In 2009, a carp with a human face was discovered in South Korea, and in 2010, another carp with a human face was sold for over $40,000. In 2016, a third carp with a human face was caught in the Hunan province of China by a primary school teacher who, instead of eating the fish, decided to keep it in his home. Could this be the next step in evolution or just a weird coincidence? You be the judge. Number 5. Creepy octopus thing. A creepy octopus fish has been reeled in near Coney Island, New York. This is a classic example of a mysterious deep-sea fish being unexpectedly caught by a fisherman. Many people have pulled out bizarre things over the years, but this one is really strange. It looks like a monster from an alien movie, or like a baby kraken that somehow got too close to the surface. It appears to have 3 tentacle legs, a weird fat head that almost looks like an octopus, and basically no bones. But it's probably not really that mysterious. The fish is most likely a clear-nosed skatefish, which is closely related to a stingray. It could just be that its wings are tucked underneath its body and don't protrude at all. In the video where the fish is flopping around on the boards and looking a lot like an alien, it's highly likely that the fish is just suffering and misshapen because it's not in the water where it's supposed to be. Underwater, this fish would be floating flat over the bottom just like a stingray. On land, it looks like a weird malformed sea monster. Number 4. Bearded fireworm. A fisherman in Texas has caught one of the strangest worms that you will ever see in your life. It's known as a bearded fireworm, and it's not only creepy, it's super poisonous. As the story goes, the woman was at the pier in Port Isabel when she reeled in her line. At first, she thought she had gotten seaweed tangled on her hook, but after a closer look, she realised it was a creepy worm. The worm was covered in bristles and coloured bright red. Luckily, the woman who reeled in the bizarre worm was smart enough to recognise the bright colours and not touch it. If she had, the fireworm could have given her an extremely painful sting. Fireworms spend most of their lives on the floor of the ocean and use their bristles to stab predators and inject them with powerful neurotoxin. A single sting will make you feel like you're on fire, and the sensation can last for hours. These creepy worms hide under rocks in the daytime and then come out at night to eat the remains of already dead sea animals. As far as creepy things go, these worms are up there. Great, now we all have another thing to fear stepping on when we go for a swim at the beach. Number 3. Alien fish. It's not a typo, a fish that looks just like an alien has been caught in Norway. While some people are saying this fish resembles a creepy prehistoric sea monster, others think it looks like a weird alien fish. It was caught by a young Norwegian fisherman back in 2019 off the island of Andøya in Norway. The man who caught the fish was working as a sports fishing guide and was trying to catch blue halibut when he instead caught the creepiest fish of his life. According to him, it took about 30 minutes to reel in the fish. That was because his line was around 2,600 feet deep. The fish that he caught was slimy, it had eyes that were way too big for its body, and it looked like an overgrown tadpole. But the specimen is not actually an alien, of course. It is, however, prehistoric. The fish is known as a ratfish, and it's a relative of the shark dating back to around 300 million years ago. The fish eats crustaceans and is pretty non-threatening, living deep in the ocean. According to the man who caught the fish, it tastes great. The way it looks just turns me off from ever trying it though. I could never eat an alien. Number 2. Mississippi's Fishzilla. There's an invasive and super creepy fish plaguing the waterways of Mississippi, and it's being called the Fishzilla. Recent catches of the so-called Fishzilla, also known as the northern snakehead fish, are beginning to freak out fishermen in the area along the Mississippi. The snakehead fish is not an indigenous species, and the fact that these fish are appearing in bigger and bigger numbers is very disturbing, since they have the potential to wipe out much of the local species and disrupt the ecosystem. Apparently, these fish first came to the region as pets in people's homes, but over the years, they have been let out into the wild and now they are growing in numbers. The reason they are so creepy is because they can crawl out onto the land and survive on the shore. They look a lot like snakes. A northern snakehead can even slime its way across land like a big fat snake. Fish living on land, making their way across the lakes and rivers of the world and preying on the helpless native populations, sounds like Fishzilla is a pretty smart nickname after all. Number 1. Toothy Fish. This number 1 candidate for the creepiest fish looks like an American relative of the famous piranha. It was caught in Oklahoma waters by an 11-year-old girl. Just like with the northern snakehead, this is an invasive species that has no business being anywhere near Oklahoma. The fish is a pacu, and they typically belong in South America. However, people illegally dump them into the lakes and they slowly begin to thrive as apex predators. This particular creepy catch has teeth that are way too human for anyone to feel comfortable with. Opening up this thing's mouth reveals jagged teeth, all bumpy and weird like the fish hasn't brushed them for 30 years. But I'm sure he wouldn't hesitate to make any of us into a snack. I'll be watching very carefully before I set foot in any body of water again. From gigantic trees that have seen it all, to jellyfish that can literally live forever, here are 9 of the oldest living organisms in the world. Number 9. the Bristlecone Pine. There's something a little awe-inspiring about looking at the oldest living single tree on the planet. Apple trees can live to be around 300 years old, and we have all seen massive redwood trees that look like they have seen many things over the centuries. They practically seem like wise beings. So, it should come as absolutely no surprise that in the dry white mountains of California, there stands the oldest living tree on our planet. It is the Bristlecone Pine, and it is a twisted and gnarled tree that mostly looks dead, but is actually still alive. And according to scientists, it has been alive for a stunning 4,841 years. It is also considered to be the oldest organism on the planet. That's right, this tree is nearly 5,000 years old. It began growing right around the time that Stonehenge was first being built. That means that in California, this tree was growing as humans journeyed into the Bronze Age, as the Egyptians built the pyramids, and as the Roman Empire spread across Europe and Africa. And even after the Roman Empire fell, the Black Plague spread through Europe. The civilizations of the Old World and the New World violently collided after 1492. The Industrial Revolution brought humans even greater power, and the Information Age spread our knowledge across the planet. This Bristlecone Pine still stands tall. It's actually not unusual for these trees to reach such an advanced age. According to the US Forest Service, trees like Methuselah, as this tree was affectionately named, are slow growing during the winter, making their wood resilient to disease. Unlike other plants, bristlecones do not deteriorate as they age. What an incredible tree! How much longer do you think this Methuselah giant will continue to stand alive and proud? Let me know in the comments section below, and while you're down there, remember to subscribe if you haven't already. Also, if you like this video, show it some love and give it a thumbs up. Number 8. The Immortal Jellyfish. It's time to meet an immortal sea creature. We already know that turtles can live an extremely long time, but there is one immortal jellyfish that may have found the ability to cheat death. This jellyfish is only 25mm in length, and its real name is Turritopsis dorni, which is quite the mouthful. In any case, this jellyfish has no heart, it has no brain, and it is basically just a tiny speck of living jelly floating through the oceans of our planet. However, some of these jellyfish may be very well the oldest organisms on Earth according to the New York Times. Now keep in mind, it is kind of a cheat, but it's cheating death itself. You see, the jellyfish starts as an egg, which then morphs into a small polyp, a tiny organism that clings to something, usually a rock, while it grows. Eventually, the jellyfish will grow big enough to become a free-floating jelly with the typical bell shape and wriggling tentacles. While it may seem large in pictures, remember it is only 25mm long. Do you want to know the trick to its immortality? Well, when this jellyfish is stressed, it reverts. It gets rid of its tentacles and its bell, and it goes back to the infant version of itself, the original polyp. The polyp is identical genetically to the older jellyfish, but it is now a small jellyfish that will need to mature again. Basically, the jellyfish can revert into its younger self, mature to adulthood, revert to its younger self, mature to its adulthood, over and over for eternity. Of course, this only works if the jellyfish doesn't get eaten by a predator somewhere along the way. Scientists have discovered the trick to this animal's biological immortality, but sadly we can't yet make use of it ourselves. Regardless, it's impressive that there is a creature in this world, even a small one, that's actually cracked the code to eternal life. Number 7. Permian Bacteria. 250 million years before today, the Earth was a very different place. It was the time of the Permian era, full of strange and wonderful life forms. What marked this time period so well was the impressive Permian extinction, one of the great extinction events that wiped out almost 99% of life on the planet. In late 2000, scientists uncovered 4 unknown strains of bacteria that date back to this ancient time on Earth. They also managed to revive these strains of bacteria, bringing to life the oldest living organisms ever discovered on our planet. The bacteria had been lying dormant in a large cavern in New Mexico. The scientists actually had to collect rock samples to discover the bacteria spores locked inside. It took about 3 months to carefully culture the bacteria in extremely sterile conditions, but the scientists did eventually bring the 4 strains of bacteria back into existence. Depending on who you talk to, this is an extremely scary thought. There are lots of fears about scientists bringing back extinct bacteria, viruses, and other nasty living organisms that could have a devastating effect on society as we know it now. This discovery was almost 20 years ago, and scientists have been debating whether or not these bacteria are really as old as they first seemed. Now, it's unclear where the research will land on the facts of these ancient microorganisms. Researchers in Japan have claimed to revive their own prehistoric bacteria, and claims of different old microbes place them anywhere from 8 million to hundreds of millions of years old. Really, I don't care exactly how old these fossilized bacteria are. Just the thought of scientists doing this kind of zombie resurrection is terrifying. If these do cause illness in humans, it could be the end of our run here on Earth. What do you think? Should we even permit scientists to do this type of research? Let me know your opinion with a comment down below. Number 6. Bee bacteria. Let's talk about another microorganism that's been around the block for millions of years. Microbiologist Raul Cano and his team of scientists were the first to ever successfully revive ancient bacteria. This is a little different from most other samples, as it was retrieved from ancient bees. That's right, 30 million years ago there were still bees buzzing around the planet, just as there are today. They might have been a little bigger than we're used to, but they did exist. You might not know this, but bees are actually some of the oldest insects in the world. And back in 1995, Raul Cano and the rest of his scientists managed to extract bacteria spores from ancient bees they found encased in amber from the Dominican Republic. And yes, I thought the same thing. This is just like what happened in Jurassic Park. The only sad part is that it's currently still impossible to resurrect larger animals. However, this incredibly old and long dead organism was brought back to life. They discovered that the ancient bacteria inside of prehistoric bees are actually quite similar to the same microbes currently living in modern bees. It looks like some animals and some organisms simply don't change that much with the passing of time. But as for resurrecting the bees themselves from 25 million years ago, we are still a little short in the technology department. Maybe in a few years, but not today. Number 5. Volcano Sponge. The volcano sponge is an extremely ancient living organism, and surprisingly, it's also classified as an animal. How is a sponge an animal? Well, it is an animal in the same way that coral and other marine life can be considered an animal. If it has predators, you bet it's an animal. This bizarre sponge is typically found off the McMurdo Shelf in Antarctica. It is believed to be about 15,000 years old, and it grows to be this old because of the extremely cold conditions that characterize its habitat far below the surface of the ocean. The sponge can grow to be about 6.5 feet or 2 meters in height, and they grow at an extremely deep point in the ocean where it's dark and frigid. Because of this, there is very little known about this ancient organism. What we do know is that the most common predator for the volcano sponge is a sea star. Sea stars can accumulate in hordes on a single sponge and slowly eat it until it dies. This may not be as exciting as a shark attacking a fish, but it is still a predatory strike, and by some of the friendliest looking fish in the sea. It's also important to note that sponges grow at an extremely slow rate. It's basically unobservable in a human lifetime. And while volcano sponge can be attacked by sea stars, they also use their bodies to provide a home to many small worms, amphipods and isopods. Such weird and prehistoric creatures growing slowly in the depth of the ocean, the whole thing is eerie to me. Does it creep you out too? Let me know in the comments below. Number 4. 1000-year rose. The world's oldest rose is some type of genetic freak. It simply didn't die with the coming of winter. No, it lived for many lifetimes and still thrives today in Germany. Talk about one resilient flower. This rose is believed to be at least 1000 years old and the oldest living rose on the planet. It's not the oldest organism in existence, but it's definitely a worthy addition to the list. It grows on the side of a partition on Germany's Hildesheim Cathedral in a secluded and calm area. Many people believe the flower was first planted in the early 800s at the founding of the church. By some miracle of nature, this hardy rose managed to creep up the side of the building for hundreds of years, and it still continues to bud and bloom with each passing of the season. It produces pink flowers once a year in May. Is it a miracle? It just might be. Do you think it's blessed? Let me know your answer in a comment. Number 3. Li Jiawan Grand Ginkgo King. Another miraculous and ancient tree on the other side of the world makes all others pale in comparison. While the Bristlecone Pine in California might be the oldest living tree today, there is actually an ancient tree in a rural Chinese valley known as Li Jiawan Grand Ginkgo King that is pretty close in ancientness. This tree dates back about 4,000 years and is known as the largest ginkgo tree in existence. The tree is shrouded in Chinese legend, and it's actually famous because of one man who lived in the tree for an estimated 2 years. The man was supposedly a cattle farmer in the 1970s and decided to live in a massive hollow in the ginkgo tree. It was undoubtedly quite roomy, as the tree trunk is over 50 feet or 15 meters around. There is plenty of space in the hollow, which measures about 30 square feet or around 3 square meters. A tree with enough space inside for a human to set up a home, and one that has been living as a legend for thousands of years? I'd love to move in there for a few days, wouldn't you? Number 2. Pando, Ancient Forest. Anyone who has ever travelled to Utah is familiar with the quaking aspen. This is a pretty standard, recognisable tree. It has white, peeling bark, very thin branches, and grows in dense groves of thousands. But there is one very old tree in Utah known as Pando. Though it is not just a single tree, this unique quaking aspen is a collection of 47,000 trees, more like a living, breathing organism connected by tangled roots than a single sprouting tree. And guess what? All 47,000 trees are clones. How can trees be clones, you wonder? Well, apparently this entire ancient forest was grown from a single seed. That one seed sprouted, grew a tree with healthy roots, and those roots spread throughout the grove. What happened next? Over the centuries, this growing organism sprouted about 47,000 trees that are still standing. The grove stretches over 106 acres. A group of researchers carried out studies on Earth and studied 72 years of photography in order to find out how Pando has changed during this time. The team discovered that grazing animals and human encroachment have caused a decline in Pando's well-being. For this possible reason, Pando has not been able to replace its aging trees and as a result has reduced in size over the past 50 years. While it is extremely difficult to pinpoint the exact age of the ancient forest, researchers believe it to be about 80,000 years old. Obviously, the original tree has long since fallen, but the clones are still part of that same seed, making this an extraordinarily old organism. This could be the most amazing demonstration of resilient life ever, and we should do our best to protect it. If you ever want to see this giant old forest of clones yourself, make sure to visit it at the Fremont River Ranger District in the Fish Lake National Forest, located in Utah. Number 1. Honey mushroom fungus. One of the oldest organisms on Earth might actually reside right beneath your feet. Not at the moment, of course, but it could be if you went for a hike exploring the gently rolling hills and babbling brooks of the Malheur National Forest in Oregon. It's one of the oldest organisms on Earth, and it extends for miles on the forest floor. This is a primordial giant, and it covers a whopping 4 square miles of land. That's about 1,665 football fields. And while it is typically unseen beneath the ground, each fall season the organism sprouts anew, once more revealing its ancient existence. This organism is a sprawling mushroom fungus. I learned that this hidden ancient giant is actually one example of a very common species of fungus known as honey mushrooms. The organism was discovered back in 1988, and it's more than just a single mushroom. It has fungal branches beneath the soil, which it has spread for thousands of years to create a kind of complex system of organic material beneath the soil. Scientists have actually proved that the fungus is genetically identical throughout its entire 4 square miles. Not only does this make it the largest known organism in the world, but it is also extremely old. Researchers estimate the sprawling fungus is anywhere from 2,400 years old to 8,000 years old. These aren't merely the harmless mushrooms you might expect. On the contrary, these mushrooms are known to kill the trees around them. Even at a distance of 2 feet from the roots of a nearby tree, you can find that this fungus has already rotted away all its roots. This is how the tree does not get enough nutrients and slowly dies. Now that's terrifying. Let me know something in the comments though. Did you know organisms of this size existed, and of this age? I knew trees and fungi could live hundreds of years, but not thousands. Also, don't forget to subscribe if you enjoy this type of content, because there are always lots of amazing fact-filled videos coming out, and you won't want to miss them. Now, which of these incredibly old organisms would you like to see with your own 2 eyes? Tell me in the comments below, and thank you for watching. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe while you're there. See you next time for another great video.